Welcome to the second and final part in our series on the things you need to start beekeeping. In the first video, we only got through knowledge, but knowledge is really the most important thing, so that's not too surprising. Before we get to the equipment, let's start with where to do your shopping. This will apply to all the things we cover other than the bees themselves. You can either order from a major beekeeping supplier like Man Lake or Dedant, or you can see if there's a local beekeeping supplier near you. Given shipping and handling, it's probably better to patronize your local store. It's also nice to be able to actually see and handle the things before you buy them. That's especially true for things that you need to try on. Also, you can meet helpful people there. However, there could be things that they don't have that you can get from the big guys. Getting to what you need now, to the right is a Langstroth hive. I recommend getting a Langstroth hive and not any of the other types. Once you've mastered the basics, you can try the other hive types if you like, but I think it's best to start with the workhorse of beekeeping. The basic parts of the hive are the hive body, also called a super, the frames, also called combs, the bottom board, and the lid. These come in different sizes. There is the full, which is the standard size, and then there are fractional sizes, like 75%, 50%, etc. Each of those is referenced by the size of a full. Basically, a full super of honey is very heavy, so people like to use smaller supers for storing honey. Full-size supers are almost always used for the brood zone, though, although some people use other sizes for all the stories of the hive. It's really up to you. The standard, though, for hobbyists is fulls for the brood zone and maybe 50% supers for the top stories, which you hope will be full of honey. There are two basic ways to get a hive. You can either buy a complete set that is assembled and painted, or you can buy all the pieces and assemble yourself. It's obviously cheaper to buy the pieces and assemble. It's also not hard. But of course this depends on your budget and whether you want to hammer away in your garage for a few hours. For each hive, I would try to get 2 full supers, and at least the equivalent of 2 full supers of fractional sizes. So for example, 2 fulls plus 4 50% supers. This will allow you to build up each hive to a 4-story hive, which is a good strong size. You might end up needing more supers. This is region dependent, but this is enough to start. Of course, you need frames for all of these as well. A few extra frames are also good to get, as these sometimes break. There are also many contexts in which extra supers are useful, like when you're feeding. Ideally, you want an extra empty super as well for each hive. Let's say a few things about frames now. There are a few options. The nicest frames have wooden exteriors and completely wax inserts. These are also the most expensive and the most difficult to put together, so they aren't all that popular. Next up are the wooden exteriors with plastic inserts. The plastic insert has honeycomb hexagons stamped into it with a wax coating. The bees will draw these empty frames out into full-size comb. Most people use this style of frame. It's easy to put together and works well. They also make completely plastic frames, like those showed on the right. I don't use these because they're far and away the worst. The bees will sometimes ignore them and build comb to the side of them, for example. Any comb built someplace where the bees are not supposed to build is called burr comb, by the way. Fully plastic combs get used because they're easy, no assembly, but again I would avoid them. Finally, if you go the build-yourself route, make sure you paint your supers. If you do, they'll last for ages. Next up is the hive stand. This can be anything that gets the bottom board off the ground. A few basement blocks are a common method. You can also make your own fancy stands if you're handy in the wood shop, but it's cosmetic. All you really need to do is get the hives off the ground. A hive in waterlogged ground will rot, and if ants are a problem in your area, then getting the hives off the ground is part of how you protect them. There are a couple of other pieces of equipment you'll need to get started. First, you'll need a smoker. A normal-sized one like the one shown to the right is fine for a hobbyist. For fuel, you can collect pine needles, or buy the fuel they sell at beekeeping suppliers. You also need a hive tool. Nothing can be done in beekeeping without a hive tool. I use the basic kind shown at the right, but there are other varieties. They all work, so any is fine. Finally, there is one piece of optional equipment that I recommend getting from the start. This is a queen excluder. This is a sheet of metal usually that has holes big enough for workers to pass through, but not the queen, who has a bigger thorax. So if you put the queen excluder over the bottom super that has the queen in it, then you are limiting the queen to the region below the excluder. This allows you to make sure that the queen cannot lay eggs in the top stories of the hive, where you want them to just store honey. Let's get to personal protective equipment now. Again, I won't go through all the myriad variations, I'll just cover the basic needs. You absolutely need a veil. A sting in the eye is awful, and can and does happen. Bees even sometimes seem to go for the eyes. The two main kinds of veils are those that have a hat, like that shown on the right, and those that are just a veil that goes over your head. I recommend the kind that has a hat. It's more comfortable and it keeps the veil away from your face, but they all work. You don't absolutely need a bee suit, but I recommend getting one to start. Probably a half suit is enough, but a full suit is good too if you have any worries about getting stung. Basically, getting stung is mostly a choice in beekeeping. You can avoid 99% of stings if you try, but many don't. The main trade off is that beekeeping is done in the spring and summer, and wearing a suit while lifting the supers is hot. You're going to sweat in that suit, so you're trading the uncomfortableness of being hot for not getting stung. For many, they'd rather get a few stings than be hot and sweaty, especially on a really hot day. Gloves are the same story. If you wear them, you won't get stung, but it's harder to manipulate things with fat gloves on. Some people think that when you wear gloves, you also lose touch with the bees and are too rough on them. In general, again, if you're worried about stings, then get gloves. They come in many forms and they all work. Apart from the gloves sold at the beekeeping suppliers, there are also latex and nitrile gloves used in hospitals. These work for beekeeping and are far less annoying than the big leather gloves. The leather gloves also get really sticky and stiff over time. When I wear gloves, I use single-use nitrile lab gloves. That's it for basic equipment. Let's move on to space. If you're a hobbyist who just wants a couple hives, then most backyards are big enough. There are a few things to consider though. First, you have to check the laws in your county or city to see if you're allowed to keep bees at your house. Most places allow it, but some don't. If you're allowed, then you just need to make sure the hives are placed someplace where the bees won't be flying through an area where people walk as they leave the hive. This usually means about 10 yards or so in front of the hive have to be free. It's also best to keep your hives out of sight of your neighbors if you can. Some people are afraid of bees and might complain if they can see your hives. Also be considerate of your neighbors. If your hive is just the other side of your shared fence, then when you work your bees, angry bees might fly next door. Also, if you have mean bees, then don't keep them in any size backyard less than an acre or so. Think about what's going to happen when the bees are having their worst day. When you've left the hive open for too long, for example, and the bees get mad. Is the hive close enough to people for them to get stung? Generally speaking, lots of people keep bees in their backyard, so it's no problem. You just have to be considerate. If you have more than 5 hives or so, then you probably need an apiary. An apiary is something that's necessary for a sideliner, not a hobbyist, so I'll leave apiary design for a future video. I'm not going to cover the equipment necessary for honey extraction in this video in any depth, because that requires its own video. Also, in just starting, you don't have to make this investment just yet. You probably won't make much honey the first year, so you have some time to consider what sort of extraction setup you want. For those who just want to know roughly speaking what's necessary, then you need a knife, an extractor, buckets, and a filter. Plus you need jars or something to put the final product in. These can all be homemade or bought from a beekeeping supplier. You can also crush comb, however, which requires no special equipment other than what is probably already in your kitchen. But like I said, this is a subject for a separate video. In short, you can spend nothing on extraction supplies, or about $400 to $500 if you want a really nice setup. Let's get to what you've probably been waiting for now, the bees. I cover this last because you must make sure that all your other ducks are in a row before you buy your bees. That means you have all your equipment assembled and painted, and you have a place to put them, along with hive stands. Once you're ready, then there are several options for getting bees. Most people will either buy a package or a nuke. To find a supplier, by the way, either Google "buy bees near me," or better yet, ask at your local beekeeping club. A package is a box of about 10,000 bees. The number varies with cost that you install into your hive. This is a process covered in many videos on YouTube. I will make such a video probably at some point, but for now I'll just say that a package is not as good as a nuke. A package has to be fed for quite a while, and packages can fail to establish themselves, or in other words, die. A nuke, in contrast, is a small 5-frame hive. Ideally, it's a colony that has already completely moved into the hive and has brood, food stores, and so forth. It should not be a package recently dumped into a nuke box. Hence, you should make sure that your nuke is a real colony with brood and honey. Otherwise, a nuke is not worth the extra cost, because a nuke, being a fully functional though small hive, costs more than a package. But these days, the price difference is not too much, so I recommend getting a nuke. A nuke has a much higher chance of surviving its first year than a package. When you get your nuke home, just put the 5 frames into the center of your full hive with empty frames on either side. You should get your bees in the spring. For one, this is when bees are usually for sale, but it's also the time when the most flowers are in bloom, making it easiest for your little colony to grow. If you bought a package, you will have to feed it even if there's a nectar flow, but a nuke should be okay on its own if there's a nectar flow. There are a few other options for getting bees. You can buy a full-size hive, which is really expensive and rarely done, or you can try to capture a swarm. Swarm capture means getting swarm boxes, which are basically empty boxes with some bee comb inside, and putting them up in trees around your area. You hope a swarm moves into one. If so, then you get free bees. This can and does work for people, but it usually takes some time to figure out how to do it in your area. To get one swarm, for example, you might need to put out 5 to 20 boxes, and some areas are better than others. All of this requires trial and error to figure out how to reliably catch swarms where you live. For these reasons, this is more of an experienced beekeeper activity. I recommend getting nukes for the beginner. I won't go into varroa control here, but you will need a device for doing mite washes, which are used to monitor mite levels, and a treatment option. There's a whole procedure for how and when to use these, so varroa control has to be covered in a separate video. Finally, last but not least, you need time, interest, and energy. Beekeeping these days requires a lot more effort than it did in the past. Before the varroa mite, bees almost took care of themselves. All you had to do was make sure they didn't outgrow their hive and then collect your honey. These days, because of the mite, beekeeping is a lot more labor intensive. You have to check on your bees every few weeks, and if you need it, you have to treat them. Beekeeping is still worth it and enjoyable for many people, but it does require a commitment from you. If you miss mite checkups for a month or so, for example, you'll probably lose your hives. So make sure you have enough time to do beekeeping. It only takes a few hours every other week or so, plus more time when you extract. Well, that's about it. I hope that's enough of an overview. There's much more to know, but you can only go one step at a time. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. See you next time.